Deirdre. I have a few questions. Um,
Ask one.
I'll start with one. So let's first focus on the great enrichment,
Yeah,
which I love the term. I use it with all my students. I think it's the right term,
I think so too.
the
I
great
think
enrichment.
the trouble with the word industrial revolution, well, for one thing, it was coined by one of our main enemies, Toynbee. He brought it over from France, and he was a socialist. He was against it all. But it's just not. It's not from a scientific point of view. It's not very good. It's not accurate.
In revolution, also, it's a 80 to 100 year period. It's hardly a
Well,
revolution.
it's more than that. It's more like 2.5 centuries, and but something like a great enrichment or you could call it modern economic growth if you want. That was Simon Kuznets's phrase. That's okay. It's kind of colorless, but the outcome is a great enrichment.
So my question is about this idea about cities versus el campo, the el campo. So there's some idea in the Netherlands, for instance, that the jump in productivity was not necessarily in the cities, where I think, if I understand your work on the great enrichment, lot of culture, language, and then afterwards some capitalist institutions actually rose within cities. But
Sure.
some historians argue that the big jump in productivity was more in the countryside.
Well,
So how would you?
I'm working on a book. I forgot when I was listing my books. I forgot one of the main ones, the ones I'm working on right now. A book on English open fields and enclosures. It's agricultural history over the last 1,000 years, or not actually from about the year 1000 to 1800, essentially. And it's about the reasons for what are called in English open fields, and it means it has a very particular structure. It means that you scatter your plots of land. You have them all over the face of the village. And then that ends in the enclosure movement. And actually half of the land is already enclosed in 1700. So anyway, that's my book. And that's the revolution in the countryside. But it's not very big. And that's one of my themes, my calculation, is that it didn't increase productivity very much. People who think that you need an agricultural revolution and then you'll get an industrial revolution and that's how it works, they're just not thinking quantitatively. Yeah, it's very nice to have an increase in agricultural productivity of 10%, and that's what it was in the enclosure movement, 10, 15%. That's not a great enrichment. That's just getting a little better agriculture. That's okay, I'm not against it, but it's static. Whereas what happened in agriculture and goods and services is massive innovation, where the order of magnitude is not of 10%, 50%. No. It's 2,500%. And that's what we need to explain, and that's why we need something very general that's affecting the whole economy. It's not enough to say railways or canals or the rule of law or something like that. That's not enough. Change in property rights doesn't do it.
So I think this numerical aspect is very important. The great enrichment was not about 10, 20, 40%
No,
more.
it
It was
very
about
big.
20, 30 times.
Exactly,
in
and
income.
that's I'm an economic engineer. I was trained that way. Engineers have had various kinds have had a lot of influence on my intellectual life. So have anthropologists, actually, both. So I'm kind of playing both sides of the street. But yeah, I mean, you have to think quantitatively to explain quantitative things.
So talking about some quantities. We have a president right now in Guatemala who said that 40% ended up in corruption of government spending,
Yeah.
and that this was the cause of Guatemalan poverty, which
Yeah.
numerically is a very bad argument, as you just said.
Yeah.
So you've talked about corruption, and we had the
I have.
opportunity to talk a little bit about this
Yeah,
off
yeah.
the record. But can you tell why corruption is not the great impediment,
Well,
or
it's
what holds back the great enrichment?
it's a bigger problem if you have a big government. I lived for 34 years in Chicago, in the United States, and Chicago in the late 1800s was amazingly corrupt. Everyone was for sale. The mayor, the judges, the policemen, everyone was for sale. Yet Chicago was the fastest growing city in the world for about 30 years. What? I thought that stopped development. No, it doesn't. If the government's small enough, it doesn't matter very much. Because, okay, if you want to do something with the government, you got to pay off the judges. All right, so what? It's when the government's big and corrupt, then it gets to be a problem. But it's not so much the corruption as the laws. It's the regulations, the special favors, the privileges to this group or that exclude the others. It's the absence of equality of permission that's the big problem.
It's the title of your new book. So let's go to your book, Beyond Positivism, because I think it's a great book.
Thank
you
you.
criticize the Neoinstitutionalists,
Yeah, I do.
among whom Acemoglu Robinson, who wrote the book Why Nations Fail, which is a very, very well, often read, popular book. And they actually talk about corruption. So they say, well, you have these political institutions with institutions not like Hayek would understand
No,
institutions.
not at all. They don't understand Hayek at all.
They talk about rules of the game, like institutions being the rules of the game by itself.
Yeah, isn't that nice? Rules of the game. If you have rules of the game and a bunch of thugs are running the rules, it's very interesting to read the Soviet Constitution. There were 3 of them, in the 20s, the 30s, and the 1970s. And they're beautiful documents. They say, there's free speech in the Soviet Union. Free press. And then, of course, you hand it over to a bunch of criminals. And you get what you got. So, as I say, I mentioned it in the earlier hour, if you don't have a sufficient number of good people, honest people in the government or in the populace, you're not going to have a good society. You're going to have a society of criminals.
So there's a cultural aspect of the human beings embodying those abstract institutions.
That's right.
And but
they're not embodying the abstract institutions. They're running them. Look, the American Constitution is a nice document. The Italian Constitution of 1947 is a much more elaborate but nice document. But there's no British Constitution. Show me where the British Constitution is written down. Non so, it's not there. Yet, over the centuries, a sufficient number of the great and good, or the self-respecting people, the ordinary people, make the British Constitution work pretty well. So it's the ethics that does it.
So let me try to be a devil's advocate. There's some examples, and you've talked about the importance of comparative economics, where we compare countries historically, but also modern day, in a modern day sense. So there seems to be some countries that have had economic success without like real cultural underlying changes. It's more like a hard hand or a harsh hand, like say Singapore or maybe even Korea, that
sure.
kind of countries that don't seem have to have that ethics or changed ethics over time, but they
Yeah, that's
did
right.
manage to develop. So how would you comment on
That's
those
right. Well,
cases?
you can have a good tyrant. Such a thing happens. As I said, I mentioned the era, about 100 years of the good emperors in Rome. And, well, that worked out pretty well. And you take the case of Singapore, or for that matter, Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a more interesting case because, well, they're both interesting, and they both inspired the Chinese Communist Party too. Actually, my friend Steve Chung, the Economist, was part of that. And Steve persuaded the grandees of the Chinese Communist Party to take the capitalist road. That makes Steve extremely popular in China among billionaires, because he made their billions possible. I was with Steve and his wife wandering around eastern China, and everywhere we went, the billionaires would give us first-class hotels and wonderful banquets because they wanted to thank Steve, who himself is quite wealthy, for his ideological input. So, of course, you can have good tyrants for the economy. I mean, that's the deal. Now, Xi Jinping wants to be Mao. So he's going back on the original deal. And this is going to be a disaster from the point of view. It's going to be good, I think, for world history, but not good for the Communist Party.
Can cultures change, ethics change from the top down by Xi Jinping, for instance? Or is that something which is bound to fail or have a series of unwanted? Or
well, it can be encouraged, I suppose, from the top down, but it and culture changes much faster than people think it does. It's a kind of governing assumption in what I call Samuelsonian economics, and even indeed in Northian economics, that culture is given, and that it changes over centuries, very slowly. And actually, this is, when you just look around, you can see that that's not so. Last night I saw a very interesting film about Sally Ride, the Norwegian-American first female astronaut in outer space. And she was gay. She was a lesbian. She hid it all the time. And actually, until she died, she hid it. She was in a 27-year essential marriage with another woman, and no one knew about it. Because when Sally and I were young, in the 50s and 60s, homosexuality, especially in Protestant countries, not in Catholic countries as much, was extremely dangerous, especially male homosexuality. Mostly the state didn't care too much about lesbians. But on the other hand, public opinion treated lesbians and gay men the same way. And if she was going to succeed as an astronaut, she had to pretend to be heterosexual. That changed amazingly. When I was a child, when I was young, when I was married for 30 years, homosexuals were illegal in Protestant countries. You went to jail for being a gay man. And then it switched. Gay marriage. Here's a quiz. What was the first country in Europe to establish gay marriage? Spain. España. So culture can change. And it changes for reasons that is sometimes, but the key point is you can't manipulate it. The Soviet Union tried for 70 years to change what is called in English the nature of man under socialism. And it didn't work.
It's like Che Guevara and the new man, no?
The new man.
Non-egoistic, not...
The new man. The new man's supposed to be a socialist. And if they ever get rid of socialism in Cuba, you'll find that the Cubans, they move to Miami, suddenly they're capitalists. What? I thought they were the new man. And this happens over and over again. Southern Italians came to the United States, Argentina, everywhere. They were illiterate. They were extremely poor. They couldn't read Sicilian, standard Italian, and they couldn't speak English. Within 2 generations, their grandchildren were graduating from university in the United States or in Australia. And what you said, oh no, there's this nonsense about the South. The South, oh, the Mezzogiorno. It's hopeless. It's been going on forever. The mafia will always be in charge. That's baloney.
So turning back to your book on which is, I think it's a critique of 2 very popular books, even among, I would say, our circles, but especially circles around the university, which is Why Nations Fail, but also like the neo-behavioralists, like Thaler, with their book Nudge, which is very popular as well. So when I mentioned both gentlemen, you said statists. And these are big threats to liberty, actually. So would you explain why?
Well, let's talk about nudging. My new friend, Cass Sunstein, is one of these people. But Cass, I think, is having second thoughts. He's got a new book called Sludge, as I mentioned last time. And the problem with the nudging idea is that it makes people into children. And Hayek writes this book in 1944, The Road to Serfdom. And people like Anchimolo and Cass and so forth were disdainful of this. They said, oh, come on, that didn't happen. And George Orwell, in the last 10 years of his life, wrote his 2 famous books, Animal Farm in 1984. Oh, come on, that didn't happen. That's their view. But as Hayek said in the preface to the American paperback version in 1956 of The Road to Serfdom, it's not so much that you get centralized government and a bunch of commissars. That's not what's going to happen. What happens is that the people become serfs. They enserf themselves psychologically. And it is a psychological effect. Liberty is scary, is frightening. To continue to be a child with mama and papa taking care of you is a very attractive option for lots of people. So we have to kind of persuade people to be free. And that's this Why Nations Fail is in some ways, well, I wrote a long review of it. And I came to the book well disposed. I wanted to, it's well written and scholarly, and I think, gee, this must be interesting. And I read the book and I realized that it doesn't tell how nations succeed. Yet people think it does. Didn't they read the title? And how many ways can you fail? How many ways can a human life fail? You get addicted to alcohol. That's one way. Jumping off a bridge, that's another. falling in with criminals. That's another. There are an infinite number of ways that nations can fail. But what we want to know, and people are not sufficiently curious about, is how nations succeed. And the evidence there, I think, is overwhelming. That nations succeed, even if only in part of the society, as in China, where the economy succeeds, and the deal was, we'll let you open a factory or move from the center of China to the coast to work in factories, but we won't let you do anything else. You don't get to vote or to have a free society or do anything. We're gonna run the rest of your lives. That's the deal. It's breaking up with Xi Jinping. But okay, how nations succeed is with liberty. That's how you get a factor of 25. If you want to have 10% and you're satisfied with that, well, then we can introduce slightly improved property rights. We can build a canal or something. We can have a government project too. We can do land reform, for example. Well, that'll give you 20% maybe. But if you want to get 2,500, you've got to do liberty.
So the Acemoglu and Robinson, I'm not sure if they do a lot of history, economic history. I'm not sure if you think they are necessarily good historians.
No, they're not good historians. But I don't mean these are not evil people and they're not stupid, but they've just. We have an expression that you must have a very, very similar Spanish expression. They picked up the wrong end of the stick.
So the positivist side, I'm not sure if it's a little jab to Milton Friedman as well. Yeah. Probably is.
Well, Milton was my friend. And,
intellectually.
He actually wrote to me after I'd written my article on, what was it called? On the rhetoric of economics, and then my book of that title, back in the 1980s. He wrote to me and said he regretted writing that article of his, Positive Economics. The two people who put this silly method into economics were Milton and Paul Samuelson. And they disagreed with each other on lots of things. And at one point, Newsweek had columns by each of them on alternate weeks. Samuelson would write one, and then Milton would write another. And Milton's columns were much better than Samuelson's. Samuelson was a friend of my family. My mother was Paul Samuelson's long-term mixed doubles tennis partner. I sort of like to drop that into the conversation from time to time. It's completely beside the point. I didn't know Samuelson. I think I shook hands with him once when I was a student, and that's it. So, but the two of them had this neo-positivist notion that's essentially Vienna School positivism of Wittgenstein Mark I. I'm Wittgenstein Mark II. And I'm a child of what's his name? Of the students of science after the Second World War, who actually looked into the history of science instead of just thinking, well, it must be this modus ponens, and that's all you need. The implications. I had an argument once with George Stigler, the great economist colleague, and George had become a big enthusiast for an economic theory of politics that said that the way politics works in a democracy is that people vote their material self-interest. They go into the poll and they look at the candidates and they say, well, which candidate will make my income go up the most? And they check that. And I said to George, at the time I wasn't as clear as I'm now going to say it, but I said to George, look, George, I learned from your microeconomics book that it's irrational to think that one vote can cause an electoral victory. If there are 1 million people voting, my vote, in fact, it's irrational for me to go to the polls. If it's raining a little bit, or I have something else to do, why vote? And so you, George, have a theory of rational, insane people. They're irrational to go to the polls. When they get to the polls, suddenly they're rational. What kind of a theory is that? He got mad at me. He got angry, as he always did with opponents. Unlike Milton Friedman, who was very patient and was willing to teach anyone. George didn't want to teach. He wanted you to shut up.
So last question, I'll open it up to questions. I'm sorry. So if you talk about Acemoglu and Why Nations Fail, they talk about extractive and inclusive political institutions.
Yeah,
it seems like simplifying reality to do
well,
positive
look,
and
look,
empirical
look,
work.
Come on, it's pre-liberal versus liberal. I mean, Doug Norris and Wallace and Weingast wrote this book, 2005 or something like that, which I'm fond of saying, this is a very nasty thing to say, so you'll have to apologize. I'm supposed to be a Christian. I should be more generous. But it's the second worst book in economic history I've ever read, this book.
Which one?
2005 with the three authors, North, Weingast, and Wallace, or Wallace and Weingast. Number one is Doug's book shortly afterwards. His book, I forget what it's called. It's just terrible. It's the worst one. These are people whom I love and respect. You should see how I treat my enemies.
Yeah.
Who? Marx? Well, here's what happens. I still say, although I'm not completely sure of this now, that Marx was the greatest social scientist of the 19th century without compare. I say this to my conservative friends. And they say, Deirdre, I hate you. And they walk away. And then, no, not statist, but I'm a Marxian then. And then I turn to my left-wing friends and say, but he got everything wrong. And they say, oh, Deirdre, I hate you. And they walk away, which is why I haven't got any friends.
Hi.
Yes, dear.
Question for you. What's the best way to persuade an 18-year-old to be free?
A priest?
No, 18-year-old to be free.
To be free?
Yeah.
Well, one way is to call what we're all about in this room adultism. Because what we want to create, obviously, is a society of self-respecting adults. Everyone. So the wife's not to be a subordinate to her husband, and they're not to be any masters. And an 18-year-old wants to be an adult. Most of them do. So you got to press this point. Do you want to be an adult? Well, if you have children, are you going to support them? Or are you going to be a man who walks away? No, that's not an adult man. An adult man doesn't just inseminate someone and then walk away. You take care of him. If you're a woman, do you want to make yourself into a serf of your husband, or do you want to have a career if you want one? And so that's what you say to the 18-year-olds, I think. But we liberals, we essential liberals, as I call myself now, we do a lot of brain talk. We should do more heart talk. The conservatives and the progressives have better songs. They have all the good heart appeals. And we need more of those. But I highly recommend a great poem made into a song by Robert Burns, the national poet of Scotland, called "A Man's a Man for A' That." I have to get the dialect words in Scots. You got to know what they mean. But that is a liberal anthem, and we should have more of those. You can look into country music or rock music and find liberal songs.
You have used quite a few times the word enemies.
The word what?
Enemies.
Enemies. No,
and
try
many
not to.
liberals do not like to think of enemies. They like to say that they have adversaries or people who differ in opinion.
I know.
But you're very bold on that. Can you
Well,
elaborate?
in my writing, I try not to. I don't call them enemies, and I try to persuade them. I try to sweet talk them. But I want them to know what their own opinions are, and if they think they're helping poor people, I want to show them they're not. And I'm, as you know, if you read my work, I'm kind of tough on them. And that doesn't make me popular. I have a book in 2008 against tests of statistical significance, which are completely silly. And many theoretical and applied statisticians for the last 100 years have said the same thing I say. And Steve Ziliak and I say. But this doesn't make me popular with economists. But, you know, I'm sorry. I got to tell the truth as I see it. And I try not to just, I'm not a party person. I've never liked being a member of a party in the sense that I get my opinions from Milton Friedman, and that's all I need to know. I had a very embarrassing episode. About the second time I met Milton Friedman was a party. The first week I was an assistant professor in 1968 at the University of Chicago, and we had a cocktail party. Milton was there, and we were all standing around him. Milton was very short. And so we were all taller than he was, but he was holding forth. And I had read his column in Newsweek the week before, in which he said, professional sports in the United States is a monopoly. And it is. It's exempted from either common law prosecution or antitrust by the United States Congress. So the NBA or the NFL or any of the others, they're all monopolies. And that's why they're so expensive to go to these games. Anyway, and so we were around there, and I ventured the opinion, now hear what I say, that American professional sports were monopolies. And Milton looked up at me and said, "How do you know?" That was his favorite question. How do you know? And I'm sure he was sincerely looking for some additional evidence one way or the other that this kid who he had just hired. And I couldn't say, "I know it because you said it last week." And that's a shameful position to be in. You've got to, so I kind of edged away and didn't answer his question. And I learned from that and many other episodes of that character that just saying, "I'm a liberal, therefore I have the following opinions," is not good enough. You have to defend your opinions, and that means you get into arguments with people. And I'm sorry, but I'm willing to be, someone called me the conscience of economics. Me. Well, okay. I'm willing to accept this low-wage role that everyone hates me. Okay, but someone's got to do it. We can't go on saying these incorrect things, whether about the economics or statistics or politics. We got to say true thing about history. We got to say the truth.
Can you please repeat the name of the poem by Burns?
A man's a man for all that. A man's a man for all that, it means. You see on Birkikade laird, was struts and stairs and all that. Birkie means a young, proud man. That, and they call him a laird, they call him a lord. Though hundreds worship at his word, right? He's got all these followers. He's but a coof for all that, which is a Scottish word, means a fool. The man of independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. And it's a wonderful poem. You all ought to read it. Because it's about equality of permission. Burns himself was a poor farmer. And I mean poor. He couldn't vote in Scotland. He didn't have enough land. But he had this wonderful gift of poetry. So it's about self-respect. The honest man, he says, one of the lines in the poem, it's just filled with it. The honest man, though sa poor, is king of men for all that. The honest man, however poor, is king of men for all that. Yes. I weep. It was sung at the opening of the first Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh since 1707. In 1999, this is a devolution in the United Kingdom. And now there's a Scottish Parliament since 1999. And that song was sung by a Scottish folk singer. And if you understand the poem, again, there are these Scots words you got to get. If you understand the poem, if you don't cry when you hear that, you're not a liberal.
Thank you. Do you still have that letter that Friedman wrote to you about?
Yep. I have it in my file somewhere. It's in a big pile of stuff. I should work it. It's in hundreds. I had more reaction to that article, the rhetoric of economics, than to any other thing I've ever written. Yeah. I mean, I got hundreds of letters from economists, mainly economists. Among them was Milton. I should have immediately published the letter, but it's a letter from him. I didn't want him to, it's in a sense his property. In the sense that I didn't want to embarrass him. So I don't know. Maybe I should go find it.
Well, I'll send you an email and a reminder.
I got some other things I need to do before I face my Anglican God. And she, by the way, is a Black Briton, working class. She's heavy. She's overweight. She works at the local grocery store in Leeds. She's a single mother lesbian. So don't expect an old man in a beard. You're going to be disappointed. That's my Anglican God. She's my God. She's up in heaven. When I die, you're gonna face him, dear. So get ready. Face her. So get ready. It's not a man.
Professor, I have two little questions. One is about your latest book, Beyond Positivism.
Hold it closer, dear.
About the Beyond Positivism, no? One of my favorite books that is As Counter-Revolution of Science that Hayek wrote
Yeah,
during the 50s.
yeah,
You're sympathetic with his
very
argument
much.
in that book?
Very much. I mean, this is the post-war science studies.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the name of one of the main figures, and the guy who wrote about Copernicus and the revolutions in science. Yeah, Thomas Kuhn, whom I knew slightly. Thomas Kuhn and the children of Kuhn, sociologists, historians, some philosophers. Some philosophers stick with positivism; they can't get over it. But some, like Feyerabend, Paul Feyerabend is one of my heroes. They say there's no such thing as scientific method. Stop this silly talk. There's human persuasion. That's what we do in science. And it's, as we say in basketball, it's a full court press. You argue empirically, logically, however you can. You're trying to persuade another human. If you had to summarize science studies after the war in one sentence, it would be scientists are human beings. The decipherment of Mayan glyphs was stopped for decades by a man named J. Eric Thompson, who was an Englishman, a professor at Harvard, and was the doyen of Maya studies in the world. And he said, no, this isn't any kind of syllabary like cuneiform in the Middle East. It's just ideographs. If you want to talk about a cow, you have a picture of a cow. And he attacked anyone who said anything else. Then in 1973, the glyphs were decoded. And that's how science actually works.
My question is about the current situation about liberalism.
Yeah,
Let
I was
me
talking to
explain
her about
that. You're the president of the Montpellier Society,
I
for
am.
example. In my view, is my humble view, we have in so many ways a zoo in the liberal circles. Because, for example, you said that during the beginning of the 20th century,
Yeah.
a lot in the Protestant countries punish the homosexuality, for
Yeah, they
example.
really did.
And for me, I'm a lawyer. Liberty Fund, for example, published a book from Patrick Devlin. And Patrick Devlin was, in so many ways, a strong conservative lawyer that, in so many ways, favored the punishment against the homosexualists.
These are not liberals; they're conservatives.
Yeah. But then Herbert Hart, H.L.A. Hart, published against Devlin.
Good for him.
In my view, Liberty Fund will publish the two books, the Herbert Hart and Devlin. Not only publish.
Yeah, I understand
Devlin.
that, and that's what we hope to do at the Montpellier Society.
Okay, yeah, because
have some debates.
Yeah, I think he cut the debate, and for me, Herbert Hart in so many ways is a liberal.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right.
This is my concern about the situation of liberalism. Yeah,
that's right. We don't want to become a party.
Yeah,
we want to have a conversation. And if I could get it going, look, I have a book that's finished and I can't sell it. If you can get a publisher, I'll be very pleased to publish it. It's about liberalism and Christianity. And I'm trying to get Protestant theologians to talk to liberal, in my sense, economists. And the problem is they hate each other. The liberal economists mostly think, theology, Christianity, God, what's that got to do with anything, on the one hand. And the Protestant theologians, not so much the Catholic social teaching, they're a little better. But the Protestant theologians are all statists, to a man or woman. And a friend of mine said, look, this is a hopeless mission. He told me, look, what makes you think that someone will pay $30 for a book criticizing their deepest held opinions? And both sides have these deep opinions.
Just because you mentioned the Mont Pelerin, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed young in the 1983 meeting in Berlin. And I had occasion with another friend of having my picture taken with Hayek. And
I never met Hayek.
I beg your pardon?
I didn't ever know him.
Okay. Well, he came to Guatemala, but that was another time before. What I really took from that meeting was when he was at the table on the podium, and then we had 100 seats or something like that, and he looked around and he said, "It was never meant to be like this."
I can't hear you.
It was never meant to be like this.
What do you mean, never meant to be like this? Why didn't he like it?
Because it became institutionalized and there were so many people. I'll say something extremely unpopular. I'm pretty unpopular. Most people know me here. Extremely unpopular. At the last API, which was here in Guatemala, you know what was my thought? I said, more than half the people here, for sure, more than half, who were going to spend a few days here beating down on government, flew down here on the government dime.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
and academia. But I want to make an even more provocative question. We speak about values and the importance of ideas and speech and values. And one is liberalism necessarily permissive?
Yeah.
Become permissive. And the other is, I know at least a few friends and myself who know who the real master in my house is.
Yeah.
And it's not me.
Yeah. Well,
Okay? It's not me.
That's good.
And actually, my wife teaches and does other things, and she's a psychologist. But here's my question. My question is, for all its glories, the effects of feminism, are they incidental in the breakdown of the family?
See, you're sounding more and more like Patrick Deneen.
No. I'm asking a question.
I know, but you sound like Patrick Deneen. Just I'm stating a fact. But anyway, go
That's
ahead.
an ad hominem.
Ask the question.
The question is, it's a question.
I've written an article called "The Liberal Family."
Okay. Oh, well, I haven't read that. I'd like to read it because that was actually my question, and I'm curious about it. I don't have a preconceived conviction.
I answer it
about it.
Look,
okay.
I do.
I'm not sure on what side that will end up, or on what side it will fall in terms of how will children be reared?
Yeah. Well, look.
Will children be reared by state-run schools and
better not
daycare centers?
No, they better not be. Look, but come on. There's a liberal
just asking
family.
a question.
There's a liberal family available to us, and it's essentially grown up in the last 100 years. Our ancestors had an authoritarian, basically Roman idea of the pater familias in Rome, and had absolute power over everyone in the household. The power of life and death, in fact. If you were the male head of the family in Rome, you could kill your son anytime you wanted to, and no one would bother you. Okay, so in the last 100 years, there's been a release from the shadow of an authoritarian family. And among the ways that happens is through feminism. My mother, as a married woman, as you know, it's true here too, couldn't have a bank account without her husband co-signing the bank account. He had to guarantee. Now, yeah, you understand it, but look, I'm telling you, it's not a bad thing. But that doesn't mean that we should neglect children or send them off. You know, yes, sure you are. Sure you are.
Talking about, in the last, let's say, 2-3 generations.
Yeah.
Is there or is there not any relationship? Has it perhaps swung too far to the other side?
No. Come on, look.
And what is the effect on the family?
This is what.
I'm talking 20, 30 years.
This is Patrick Deneen. I don't know if you've read this guy, but you'd find him very comfortable because he talks this way. He says that liberalism has infected everyone. The conservatives, the progressives, everyone's a liberal, and they're all wrecking the family, and the women should go back to the kitchen and so on. And that, I strongly resist this. I'm a feminist, and I want women to have equality of permission. And that doesn't mean that the state needs to take over childcare. That's what my progressive friends say. They say, well, if women are going to have careers, you got to have state financing of taking care of the babies. No, I don't. Actually, a very shocking example of this is communist Romania. Ceausescu decided that women needed to work more if the economy was going to get rich enough for him to have another palace. So he said, every woman needs to have a market job. None of this staying home and taking care of the kids. We're going to put the Romanian children into orphanages. And he did. And the result, of course, was, as you can well imagine, was catastrophic for the psychological health of Romanians. Rousseau, who's at the headwaters of European socialism, wrote his book on educating children, on childcare. While he was writing it, he had fathered all these children. And they were running around making noise in the house, as children tend to do. So what did Rousseau do? He put all his children into orphanages, in which, in France in the 18th century, the kids died. So this is the great socialist hero, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So no, there's a liberal path for the family, and the problem is that the family metaphor is a very dangerous one, because if we think of the nation as the family, then we get into the pater familias attitude. The king is the father of the country, and then we go right into tyranny.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, so please, big applause for Deirdre.